Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justin the Food Entrepreneur Show. I'm Justin Bizzarro. I'm your host. That's Bizzarro. For anyone who's out there, you can find us on Instagram at Justin Bizzarro or at Justin the Food Entrepreneurs. You can also find us on Gorilla Brave as we're building that out as well. I have Josh back with us from Burger and Butcher. How are you doing today, Josh?
I'm great, Justin. I appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to dive back into a little bit of your story because there'll be a 3-month gap between these coming out. I'm going to distance them a little bit because
Yep.
I want to anchor it. I want to give time for the new thing that you're working on to gain some traction for you as well. I think that's a really cool thing that we're going to talk about. And that way it has some traction when this episode comes out and they can hear it as well. I think that'll be it, but we'll see how it goes. Sometimes I get excited or something relevant comes up, guys, and episodes move around. So there's that. Let's talk about, we're getting into purpose, drive, ambition the last time we talked. Okay. And for the audience, let's just do a quick, 3 to 5 minute synopsis again of your background. Cause I think working in the ports, having that background in life definitely translated into who you are now, your ability to ask questions, your ability to have discernment. I'm going to use the word discernment for you today because I think it's important.
Sure.
But anyway, let's quick go through the story to where you are now, how you got to Burger and Butcher, not any crazy details. If anyone wants that in the audience, please go back and listen to the first episode, but I'm going to give it to you guys because it's going to be relevant for the questions I'm going to ask. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so I started my adult career, I guess, as a federal agent working for both the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. You know, at the time as a young man, I believed in government. I believed in everything they told us. I was I'll say a little naive, but also a patriot, and was lucky enough to take an early retirement and go work for the International Longshoremen Association, which was a labor union, which, was something I knew nothing about, but it allowed me to not have to travel and leave. A lot of times when you're in the government, you have to do a certain amount of time in DC or in other field offices. And I was coaching football at the time for my son, and I really just wanted to settle down and stay in my hometown, which I had finally got to move back to after years of living all over the country, and learned a lot. I took a lot from my career in federal law enforcement, but then seeing a whole different perspective on both government and how international trade works, and how our trade deficits and how the shipping industry works, and how we interact with foreign companies as opposed to U.S. producers. And it was just a lot of lessons learned. I work for some super smart people that really understand, and I've got to learn a lot and still work there. But also, over the last few years went through my health journey, which led me to the learning process of all of the things in government that are clouded by money and influence, and just was really disappointed with the way some of our systems work, especially the medical systems and the food systems, and wanted better for my family and wanted to provide better for my community, which was the precipice for me going down the road of starting a business, which I knew nothing about, but wanted to be able to provide that service to my community, which is where Burger and Butcher came from.
Okay. I want to ask this, and I'm going to anchor what we just said to ask this question. Talk to me about your ability to sort of what I would call look through lenses with clarity, see things with truth. And I don't mean that there's extremes out there, guys, in food, every which direction, dietary extremes, all those type of things. But there's also the ability to constantly be asking questions, even when you have to report to authority, to sort of disassemble what's going on or see things for how they are. Let's talk about that a little bit for you,
Yeah.
Josh, because I think it's an important part of being an entrepreneur also, is this ability to question, have you always been this way? How did that work out in a government position?
Yeah. So I think I always say, and I say this, but I don't really have any regrets in life. I think everything good and bad has brought me to where I am, and have taught me really good lessons. But if I had one regret, I would say it was not serving our country and its military, having got to work with those guys closely, involved in a lot of charities now. I just have a tremendous amount of respect for our war fighters and the people that go out and risk their lives and protect us. But I think as a young man, one of the reasons I didn't was I didn't have a healthy respect for authority. Let me just say that. Although I knew I always wanted to protect people and our country. And so I went down the route of federal law enforcement, which I learned very quickly that there's lots of rules and you better follow them or you're not going to have a long career. I wasn't always good at it, but I always tried. And I think I did it blindly as a young man. I followed the rules. I didn't question maybe enough, but I also worked for people who I think were genuinely good people and good leaders. And I think that helped me because, I just was focused on my particular mission at the time. But now I look at things very differently. And I think it was my health journey that really led me to look at things in a different way. And some of the experiences which led me that way were having medications that were given to me that caused me tremendous damage, that caused me to look at why is this acceptable and why is it normal practice when for me, there were clearly negative outcomes. And so as I started trying different things, diet being one of them, I said, I'm hearing all this different stuff, right? You can, like you said, with diets especially, you hear, very different perspectives on what's healthy and what's not healthy. And I tried a lot of them. And for me, I said, well, I did the carnivore diet and it changed my life. I mean, it had a tremendous outcome in a positive way on my health. And I started saying, well, why this one over this one? And oh, wait, so this guy who's promoting this left a very lucrative career as a surgeon, as a heart doctor, as a medical practitioner, because he believed that the truth was more important. That's a guy that I can believe. There's something he's saying that makes sense because he was willing to give up everything to say the truth. And then you go down that rabbit hole, and then you say, okay, why do these studies all conflict with each other? Why does one study say this and another study says that? Then you say, okay, well, let me look. Who's funding these studies? Who are the people that are behind these studies? And, the groups or scientists, how do they get their funding? Where does their funding come from? And then you start to peel back the onion and you see the different layers. And I think I look at things differently now because I understand what is behind all of them, or at least I try to. I'll never pretend to know it all, or I'm not always, finding the truth. Sometimes even I can be misled, but at least if you're searching for the truth, you're going to find it more times than not. And I think, I look for the people that I trust. I find, when you tell kids, when you're lost, look for the helpers, look for the people that are trying to help you. And I think that, you can say that for the adult world too. You look for the good people that have genuine reasons for wanting to tell what they think the truth is. And I think if you find genuine people who are, have honest intentions, it helps lead you to the truth, if that makes sense.
I'm gonna hit this now, and I'm gonna hit everyone over the head with this right this second. Okay, we in this country or in the world are being fed this thing that plant-based anything is less water, less whatever, better for the planet. Okay, I understand all of those things in a snapshot. They may be true in an isolated environment. All true. The problem with monocropping, especially with plants, is that in order to get the right amount of nutrients and minerals and stuff into the world, not just us, there needs to be a diversity of animals and plants grown in this world. Okay? And there is no other way we're going to keep animals alive unless we eat them, because we can love pandas in the zoo, we can love whatever, but we aren't saving their environment, and we certainly really aren't growing more other than in captivity. Okay? That cow that we want to grass feed and have freedom has more freedom than the panda we're trying to save. I want everyone to think about that. Yes, is the life expectancy different? Yes. Are their purposes different? Well, the panda, while we're saving its life, it's kind of an entertainment figure. It's kind of the clown. But at least the cow, we're giving it a life and a purpose, and it's regenerating into something else. Okay. Do both serve a purposes? Sure. Are both being used to give longevity to lives or the species? Sure. But here's my point, guys. If we don't eat the cows or the sheep or the goats and allow them to be in the world, they don't really have any other purpose.
Let me expand on that too, Justin, because I think that's a great point. Is that, if you're living in a city, you've displaced animals. You've displaced them for your benefit. And part of living in a place where you try to not do that, I mean, I can say where I live, we live amongst the bears. And you have to adapt to them if you want to allow them to still live in that environment. And we have those challenges because there was a couple of years where we had a governor who discontinued the bear hunt, and the population boomed, and there were conflicts between people and bears, and they were eating little dogs and they were hurting old people, and there were some issues. So they brought it back so that we could, I guess, in maybe not the most politically correct way, I'm going to say they killed the few so that the many could survive, with us. But, you have to have bear-proof cans. You have to not take your garbage out the day before. Like, there are part of adjustments that you do to allow to live with these animals. And some people are willing to do it and some people aren't. But to your point, farming is one of the biggest ways that we allow these populations to continue to thrive.
Yeah, and I'm going to start really narrowing down for everyone, okay? Like emu, ostrich, two birds that really have no purpose, that would not be anywhere other than a zoo, are used for farming. They're good food. They're good protein. There's high protein in those animals, like chicken quality, guys. And so one of the things that I swear I'm going to take to my grave is the diversity of eating things that are edible, that are outside of our normal farm animals, but also staying with those farm animals. Why is it important? Diversity of diet, not only for us, but for the earth. All the animals, all of us. Just because we may stop eating meat doesn't mean a lion's going to suddenly become a vegetarian. It's still going to have to eat an animal here or there. We're still going to have to give it meat, and we can't give it fake meat. We've seen that. They go blind. And so
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. So if we want to talk about farming and truly, and not the BS that's being put out there from a very one perspective, we have to understand that nature was created well before us. The integration happened well before we started playing with it. And we do best as humans when we enhance things. We make them better. We take the tree and make it furniture. We don't take the tree to try to make it something it's not. We don't suddenly take the tree and make it, I don't know, a human. That's what we're talking about here. Plants can't replace the human need for animal protein. And I know everyone's going to get mad, and I have vegan friends and vegetarian people that are on the podcast, and my dear friends, and I agree 100% with your viewpoint and why you're doing it. I get the goal. I share the same goal. That's why I'm not going to fight with you about it, because if we are all aiming for the same goal and we get there, great. However, there is something we should all agree upon, which is the processing of foods, the unnatural ingredients, all of those things. Those should be the real things we're fighting, not each other over whether one eats meat or one doesn't eat meat. Okay, we're fighting that on a big scale right now, and I know there's a lot of vegans and people are into that, but I'm sorry, like, there needs to be the rotation, and animals process plants and things and other animals differently than we do, so we can get the things we need from those animals. They're required steps in the processing of things for our existence and our growth and our evolution. And yes, God is involved in that. God has given us the tree. It is our job to continue to enhance our own lives and the world around us. But what does that mean? With great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility, and we have great power. So we need to be responsible. We don't need to be making extreme rapid decisions that could have extreme bad outcomes, and that's what I want to anchor. I'm going to anchor this for this conversation, because everyone in the audience, one of the things, whether we want to do the right thing, we think we live by morals and ethics, we think we live by this huge code of conduct. I will tell you, at the end of the day, if you ever die, and most people won't because they're too afraid of how they'll have to face themselves in the mirror when they'll realize this, which is real. I get it. In your businesses, in your homes, the way we purchase food is tearing apart the world, and it is causing more damage to third world countries and the environment that you think you're saving with your electric car than anything else. So no matter what you do, how much you do it, the more we continue to expand in buying food the way that we do, the more, no matter how much you try to buy whatever and counteract it, none of it matters. Because the number one thing we do is eat. The number two thing we do most of the time is the rest of it is work. Okay? Somewhere in between there, they balance. Okay? We do a lot of eating, guys. We're constantly grazing. We're constantly drinking. We're constantly have coffee in our hand. So if you think about it, think about the hours we spend consuming. But yet we don't realize that those hours are literally equatable. Think about how that coffee got there. How many coffee beans did it take to make that coffee? How many farmers did it take to make that coffee bean? Where did that come from? What is the environment? What are the governments involved in it? What do they actually believe in? What's the definition of organic in other countries? Do we allow other definitions into our country, or do we stand by our own definition? That is a good question for everyone that everyone should research, because something says organic from somewhere else doesn't necessarily mean it meets our organic standards. So, Josh, I went on a rampage there. I'm sorry. I started bashing down buildings like the Nintendo game. And
I just want to make a point on something you said, your whole organic, the whole stamp of organic on stuff. And I don't think a lot of people realize too that the percentage of farms out of our country that are given the organic stamp of the USA that are actually checked and audited is so tiny that they all know that they don't have to follow the standards because we're never going to check. And it's terrible because we trust these labels and we trust the organizations within government that are meant to protect us, and sadly that they're just not trustworthy these days. And I went through it recently where there's a great vendor that I used for milk, and I almost got rid of them because it wasn't organic. But I had to do my homework and research, and the company's actually better than organic, but they don't go through the procedures to get certified. And I would have never believed that. I would have thought it was a scam if I didn't know a local farmer who went through the same thing, and he actually, used a family plot of land to farm. So I saw firsthand what his procedures were and what he did. And so I guess you're right. You got to do your own research and you got to do your own homework, because some of these stamps just aren't what they seem to be.
Yeah, and I love the organic push, guys. I love the concept. It's just something that it's something we created a marketing term around that's existed forever before we had the Industrial Revolution 170 years ago. Okay, which led to agricultural revolution because of it. And that's why we mass produce plants. That's why we'll continue to push it, because on paper, when it comes to people outside of food integration, okay, and I'm going to emphasize this, there's a difference between someone that touches pieces of the food industry and someone who's integrated in it and has to touch all of it, from baking to cooking to ingredients to sourcing to doing it all the way to the end. From a small business like we're talking about, a butcher shop or a restaurant, or an all-in-one. In this scenario, we've had a couple of them on this podcast. Why is that important? Because the model is important. What do all the butchers that butcher and then also have a restaurant have in common on this show, guys? All of them, whether it was their intent from what they learned at some point in their life or they switched very quickly, if you go all the way back, they all went organic in terms of theology. I'm going to say it as theology, not a government stamp. We're going to talk about organic as a theology, okay, which is all natural in layman's terms. So anyway, the point being is there's a lot of things that I touched there, but I think we have a lot of farmers in this country that have been doing farming the right way always. And there's certain things that we have to understand based on climate and environment. So we can't sort of shove grass-fed necessarily on every cow. And do we need to have some tolerance, understanding what it's like to be a cow in the winter in a country that produces a lot of cows? Yeah. Is there need to be tolerance there over certain things? Yes. But do we need to understand that it's not something they're all fed sometimes? Okay. Maybe. Okay. I don't have an answer to those things, but I am saying that either way, no matter whether it's all grass or even corn finished at the end of the day, and I get the discrepancy there too that everyone gets on, the thing is still what we're missing is the next step. What kind of grass is it? Where is it grown? Does the farmer have grass that grows seasonally? Because when you do year-round grass-fed, even in winter, you can have grasses that rotate yearly. Yes, in the snow, you still need to supplement. There's no way around it, no different than feeding horses hay. That's just the way it is, guys. There needs to be calories for the animals to live, and you have to keep them alive. We just don't want them to die. That's even more irresponsible of the life of the animal. So yeah,
Justin,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You reminded me of a point. I forget where the post originated, but it was a post of a bunch of cows inside a barn and a big machine coming back and basically spitting out grass. And so, the intent was to say, this is maybe what your grass-fed cow is like. And it was trying to say that, they're stuck in stalls, they're not really out on pasture. But then this farmer from Wisconsin chimed in and said, you guys aren't realizing that in the winter, this is how we keep our cows grass-fed, and we don't leave them sitting out in the cold. We bring them in and we feed them grass. But, that both can be true. And I think that's a good point, is that everyone kind of comes from their own perspective, but sometimes you got to do a little research. And some of these farmers are doing a really great job of producing great stuff by using some technology and by using some different techniques.
And I think that's the goal for anyone. It's not me, he, there, whatever. One of the things that the ability to go and look and have to do the research on your supply chain is a big deal. In healthcare, It's something we had to do. We had to make sure all the certifications were there, all the health stuff was there. It eventually has spilled into the restaurant world, but before it was mostly just healthcare. And even then, it would layer up as you get into SQF or co-packing. You have to go actually physically step onto the properties and inspect them from your company at least once a year, and if not more. And so when you start to do that, you start to understand the quality of the humans you're dealing with, the quality of the animals, regardless of label. Okay. Labels are labels, right? We have upper class, let's just use that term, but you have an upper class person that can dress really well, and you have an upper class person that probably can't dress so well, that still dresses like Bill Gates with pleated pants and, a sweater with a white collar button down. Okay. That looks like Mr. Rogers from the 80s. So it doesn't matter that it comes in different things, and we have to also understand there's different forms. So Josh, I'm going to I've talked a lot. I want to specifically talk about the mission that you're on, what you're trying to change, how you're trying to educate. Let's really dive into that part. We talked a lot about all these anchors that I think I've scattered sort of for you there, and also for the audience. Let's totally talk about
So
what you're trying to do here.
you brought up a good point, and I'm going to use that to give one aspect, and then I'll go back to the beginning. But you mentioned, all the research you have to do as a restaurant owner. If you're on the mission of delivering genuinely healthy food to people, it's a tremendous amount of research you need to do to vet each product. And, I was lucky that I was on this mission from the beginning. So I didn't bring it into my restaurant unless I did a certain amount of research on it. And, that was the bread, it was the cheese, it was the meat, it was all the little things. I didn't even bring vegetables in the beginning because I knew how hard it would be to source, especially in winter in New Jersey, to source good quality vegetables. But, after growing demand, then I had to do the research and had to find some. But one of the things that I learned recently really impacted us and me personally was that, there's this rule that if you fry things for under 10 seconds, if you're setting a breading or something on a product, you don't have to disclose that it's using seed oils. And that is one of the absolute no-goes in my restaurant, is that there's not a seed oil in anything. And even though we were sourcing what's considered the highest quality chicken brand, I couldn't trust now that it wasn't set in seed oil. And I sat with my chef, Ethan, who, has the same beliefs. And, we sat and he's like, we can do this. And originally I would have loved to do everything from scratch, but I have a small kitchen and some of it's really hard to do. We learned early on that we had to do the potatoes that way because those were all set in seed oils. I mean, unless you're cutting your own potatoes, you are getting seed oils in your French fries. So we did that early on, but we learned that, you can't trust your chicken. And my daughter eats chicken like it's going out of style. And, I said from the beginning, if it wasn't something I would serve my family, I'm not going to serve it to my customers. So we are now, we're taking gluten-free, very low glycemic breading. We're breading our chicken in-house with local farm eggs as the batter, and we are frying them in only tallow. So I know 100% that the product that we are putting out is healthy and good for people and for my own family. And, we didn't really want to have to do that, but I can tell you from my research, there's not a product on the market. And that's, so we're not only going to use this and sell it in the restaurant and sell it for parents to take home and feed their kids. We are going to try and launch this nationally to give people another option. Now, I always struggle with the debate over price point and is it worth doing a product, or people are going to look at it and not understand what it takes to do that and say, that's too much money. And I know that I'm going to risk that with doing this the right way. But I know for me, I put the health of my family over everything. I have the philosophy that you're going to pay now or you're going to pay later. And if it means turning certain people off because of the cost, who don't really understand the mission, that's just part of doing business. And, I learned that from the beginning in the restaurant, was that there were going to be people that were off put by some of the pricing. And I've tried really hard to keep it low. I mean, as the business owner, I've not taken one penny. I put it all into my staff and into my product because, I believe in the growth of where the business is going to go, because I think it's the right time and people are paying attention and they're smart and they're not being fooled like we all were in the past. And my goal is to continue to level up. I'll never say we're perfect. Every time I discover something that I don't think is right, I'm going to change it. But I want to continue to level up what we do. And if there's a point that I see is missing in the market, I want to help fix it. I said last time, the restaurant was my first part of that. And I did the same thing, when I'm looking at stuff, I said, what do I want to see in the world? What's the change that I want? What are the things that I think could be done better? And I look at, my journey as an entrepreneur is to find those things that I'm not happy with and fix them. We did it with the restaurant, and I couldn't be happier with, the way we were embraced by the community. And, we're in the tri-state area, but where I am in northern New Jersey is very rural. But we have people traveling an hour, probably more than 50% of our customers come from an hour away just because there's nothing else up here like what we do. And there's a need for it. And I also, I had my own frustrations with our education system, and so did so many other parents. And that's one of the other things me and my wife recently did this year is we opened a school because we wanted to give parents another option, and we wanted to let the entrepreneur spirit blossom in kids and give them an option to have a different focus in education.
Oh, dude, you could not have set me up better for my next topic. I'm going to talk about this. One of the things that I want to talk about is competitiveness as a country in general, okay, and overall goals, or competitiveness as humans potentially as we go off this planet. I know, sounds crazy. There's a lot of planets out there. God's a creator. There's probably other planets out there. Maybe they're not free will planets. I don't know. But the thing that's most important is there's probably other ones, most likely. Okay. And we need to be a strong species. We need to make sure that we exist and we are strong as a species. Okay. Okay. Let's dumb it down a level. Strong as a country. Okay. Let's dumb it down a level. Strong as a legacy. So I ensure we easily forget, because technology has made it so easily, that we still need to live on, and our genes and our DNA and all that. It's really important. So what am I saying? Okay. The thing we should be investing in our children, in our countries, in our world the most is the thing that feeds every single thing on this planet. Food. And we don't understand it enough, and we have a lot of hobbies as humans, and we do a lot of things, but we don't pay attention to the thing and the impact of what we have the most. I'm going to take it a step further. In the United States, the difference between caring about someone and caring about an individual is two different things. And why do I say that? Someone is a blanket term. It doesn't really give an identity. An individual at least starts to identify them as a human or a person. Okay, what do I mean? We have one person in the federal government that never touches any of the schools, most likely, that have all the different dynamics of regional differences, determining what the best diets are for our country. In a country, by the way, that lobbying's legal, that one of the largest lobbyists is the tobacco companies, the candy companies, the sugar companies, the beverage companies. Okay, nothing against it. They're playing by the rules. But what I am saying, they get to play that way is because we as consumers allow it. Let me take it even further for you. Okay, we talk about other countries outperforming us, Japan, European countries, whatever. What is the major difference? Education, do they go to school longer? Well, yeah, okay, sure. Okay, but historically that hasn't mattered as much. American competitiveness, ingenuity, entrepreneurism has always ruled. It's not ruling right now, but it has. What are the differences? Well, one of the things that's different, especially when you go to some of these countries that are performing better, that are starting to outperform us, that are doing it better, or are immigrating to the United States and doing really well in careers that we want for Americans, but we're just not getting them high-level jobs, doctors, lawyers, whatever, accountants. What is the difference? Is it our education? Well, maybe, partially, for sure. But what's the other difference? I'm just going to use Japan as an example. Japan, in every school, has a nutritionist on staff that designs a menu for the students that is locally sourced, most likely, and rotates. There's no incentives for rebates. There's no incentives for getting a better deal. There's no living to a budget. We need to do what's best for the children. What does it cost? And let's back our way into it. This individual not only gets taught as a teacher in Japan, but gets a 3 to 5 year additional education in nutrition, and spends her time growing the humans, his or her time, growing the humans in that school for the years that they're in those schools from a nutrition standpoint. There's a difference. I'm not talking about reacting. I'm talking about being proactive. I'm not talking about what we do in our schools with our nutritionists and our dietitians and try to make sure we do it to who our supplier is. I'm talking about they're focusing on the actual health and individuality of the students. So while we have nutritionists and stuff in our school, most of us are blanket taught and most of us just buy what's needed for the school lunches or the blanket food. One, because the kids eat it. Two, because it's easier for us. We don't have to prep it. And three, we get rebates and it's easier to have one truck show up at our door and order from one person than manage multiple vendors. So every step of the way, it's easier at the cost of what? I'm just going to leave it there. But I want to focus on nutrition in schools. I want to focus on the difference of having someone in DC sort of dictate the nutrition that all nutritionists are supposed to live by in every school or dietitian, and a different education. And then part of it is if we go local and we go individual, local sourcing, local things. This is what I'm talking about. Local to the humans. What do we need in our local environment? It is different. It's hard for everyone to grasp what I'm saying. I understand. I'm having trouble grasping myself when it comes to nutrition and dietitian because it seems like a blanket thing. There is a difference when your doctor or your nutrition knows you and can subscribe food and stuff to the population it knows directly versus one that knows the population but has to subscribe something to the population through a food pyramid.
Right.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I just think the problem with that is whether it's local government, state government, or federal government, we've gotten into the place where we're doing what we can afford and not what we should. Right? It's just been accepted to be in debt, to be upside down, to not be spending people's money where it's important. I mean, as a local elected official, when I was researching, and I actually had met with several of the farmers to try and do a school to farm to school program, but the seasons don't work out, right? When we have the most abundance in New Jersey is when school's out. And so because we couldn't do it on a bigger scale, like I couldn't do it locally because it just doesn't work out seasonally here. But if you had a company, and there are some trying, they just don't really hit the mark to do it on a bigger scale, you really could have a food service company servicing the schools that does the right thing by nutrition. But as you said, when the food pyramid is pushed down from Washington, and this is the rule, how do you buck that system when so much of your funding comes from the state and comes from the federal government? So hopefully we'll know today whether that's going to change or not.
Yeah. And, there's an interesting thing I've learned over the last 10 years, I would say, is I did a lot of business with a lot of big companies that did work with the government, a lot of big companies that did a lot of business with big stars that definitely latched on to marketing and advertising on keywords. And I'm going to educate the audience on this as well. You have to be very careful what celebrities attach their name to. Okay? And there is entertainment and there's things, but just because they attach it to it doesn't mean that they've done the credibility check. It's most likely that they haven't. We just don't do that anymore in today's age. Okay? So why is that important? Are there athletes and stars that do this? Yes. Who are they? Those are the ones we should be following in restaurants, as restaurateurs, as food service, as entrepreneurs. We need to pay attention to the ones who are sort of doing the right thing. Why are they not being paid attention to? Okay, it's the same thing that we just talked about in the schools. Big companies with dollars have used what I would call food safety regulations, customized it to the way they do things, made it in unison, because the way food safety also happens is corporations or schools doing work to creating new food safety laws, like we've just had here, FMSA, or food manufacturing, food, or FSMA, food safety, whatever it is, I can't remember it anymore. But either way, anyone in the audience knows what I'm talking about. I can't get the
Yep.
acronyms. But the point being is things are going to change. There's big companies that are involved in those changes. Okay, they participate in them. Campbell's is one of them. If you look at their history, it's one of the things they've always done has been at the edge, forefront of food safety. Okay, that does not mean food quality. That does not mean food longevity. That does not mean earth safety or sustainability or regeneration. Just so we're clear on the difference there. Yes, is it important to have our food safe? Absolutely. We don't want humans dying. However, we just have to be careful of the balance of humans dying now off of food safety and humans dying massively in the future because of starvation, because we monocropped. And if you monocrop, and I don't care how much you think we can biology it, one of the other reasons for diversity is if one of our food sources gets attacked, the cows, the chickens, the pigs, like we see, we have other food sources to get the same proteins or vitamins and stuff in a natural way. So that's just that as well. So one of the things I'm excited about, I think, is to see where we're going with this in Washington. I think challenging what the status quo was is taken too long, and it's about time it's happened, especially in food. And if we want to start to really dive into problems, we could solve a lot of problems, guys, by opening our eyes just to our food systems. It will help you with your politics. Like I said, it'll help you with understanding your education system. It'll help you understanding your community. It really, I don't know how else to explain it to anyone other than there's no industry like it if you follow the proverbial potato from Idaho all the way to your plate.
Let me just, if I can, touch on something, Justin, because you made a great point, and I miss, to a certain extent, living in a world where everything isn't hyper political. But when you're talking about changing broken systems, it all stems in Washington. I mean, to your point about food safety, they even sometimes manipulate the rules of something that was meant to be such a good thing to destroy small family farms, to make it unaffordable for them to fit within certain regulations that you think is a good thing. You're thinking, oh, they made this rule so we're safe, but really what they made it for was to make it harder for small farms. And sometimes it's not even on purpose. It's because some lobbyist paid by a large food company comes in with a study and says, listen, you guys better do this or we're going to have real problems and people are going to get sick. And politicians are like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. But what's behind it is sad, and it's business as usual in DC. And if you really want to have these systems change, and you want to save small farms, and you want to have better restaurants that have better food supplies, you have to pay attention to what's going on in Washington. And it's sad that we're in that place because we can't trust the institutions that were probably put there for the right reasons, but money's manipulated them. And I'm so happy to be at a time where people are paying attention, they're fighting, and it looks like we're getting real change. And I just hope it continues. And I hope the policies change. I hope that we, instead of subsidizing as much corn and soy and other monocrops, that there's some subsidies for these family farms, local farms, regional farms, to feed people the way it was intended to. But it's going to be hard. Like, you've said, and you've made some great points in our original podcast that even I didn't think of, is that you have to have a way to feed large amounts of people that small local farms will never be able to do, but they have to be a part of it.
Yeah. And I'm going to anchor this for everyone. And this takes effort, but I guarantee you that it will benefit your business. And will your menu items increase? Yes. But you have to explain this to your customers. You have to explain it to your audience, and you have to make it abrupt change. Okay? You can't just ease your way into doing it. Why am I saying that? And everyone's like, well, I don't want to take that big of a risk and whatever. Here's the problem. If you you have your feet on both sides, it's confusing. I don't really understand your purpose. I'll probably eat at your restaurant a couple times, but as a leader in my community in a place I want to support, subconsciously, I know that you're wishy-washy and
Fair point.
so great. Stick to the bad thing if you're scared, because you're better off doing that. It's not good for the world, but you're going to have to live with the morals and ethics and understanding it later on in life when you start thinking about what did I do with my life and how could I have done better? And it wasn't about making more money on the deathbed. The thing you could have done is the thing you had the most impact on, which every day of your life, which as a restaurateur is the humans we touch and the farms we touch. What does that mean? That means we have an extreme impact on the environment and the world and the communities around us. So when I mean all in, you have to make it sound like you truly believe it. Because if you don't believe it and you're not convinced and you go this direction, no one's going to believe it either. That's one. Number two is, if you don't do it abruptly, your customers are going to think you're just trying to scam them and it's a manipulation. You
That's
have to go
100%.
all into this and through your whole system. You have to be willing to do an abrupt menu change. You have to be willing to admit it, confess it, and tell the world, I want to do it better now. And that alone, the wanting to do it better and the willingness to show the outside world that you're always progressing, we know we are as restaurants. We just don't display it. So why anchoring something like this? Well, number one, the world needs to see the test that led to our testimony in all avenues of life, especially when good's involved. But that's what I'm saying here. That's why what Josh is doing here is important. He's not waffling or he's not wavering. It's all
And
in. Go ahead.
and that's the thing I tell my managers and my employees all the time is that, you have to be all in and everything has to be done a certain way, because I know for me, and I've said this earlier, is that I come to this as a consumer, not as a restaurant person, or having been in the business before. If I think you're doing one thing wrong, now I'm going to question everything. And I look at that in every aspect. And that's why anytime I think something's not perfect, how do I change it? How do I make it better? I think that, I always tell people, I remember, you know, I had all my employees, we were all watching the announcement when RFK talked about, and not to get political because I know this is, gets it divisive, but he made the announcement that he was going to try and join the Trump administration, and put aside political differences for the mission of making our food systems healthy. And my whole staff was there watching it on our TV. And, everybody believes in the mission. And that's part of what I think I love, is that even the young people that work for me have learned, and everybody's all in. And we posted about it. We took a picture of everybody watching because we were excited about hopefully things in DC changing to help this issue that we feel so strongly about. And all the negative comments, and we have way more positive than negative, but that people are so hyper political that we can't come together on something like feeding our country and our kids and our families real food and fixing something. I think the vast majority of us agree is not working well and it's broken. Like when that's a negative thing, just because you've picked one side or the other, we have a problem. So I
Yeah.
guess my point is we've made it very clear that we had to pick a side, but our side is our mission. And, we're going to support the people and the communities that are going to help us, solve that mission. And that means my local farmers who are working really hard to produce great products, my customers who are so loyal and dedicated because they believe in us. And, unfortunately, that's also the politicians in DC who are going to take this mission on, hopefully ignore the amount of money pouring into Washington to subvert it and do the right thing. And that's the side we picked.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna say something from a biblical standpoint, or however anyone wants to look at it. Like, we were given domain over this world, and we domesticated the animals that we were supposed to. And if we suddenly, like cows and goats and stuff aren't like dogs. They can't just suddenly like be wild and maybe be okay. Most dogs are actually not going to be okay if you let them out of your home. They're not, the theory of that the dog becomes wild again is not true. I know I lived on a farm. No matter how wild they were or how much they were a barn dog, they were still domesticated. And so we just understanding that if the cow doesn't serve a purpose, a greater purpose, and we don't make sure that the cows that we're producing are also compounding good nutrients in them, it's important. Okay, do we breed and manipulate, and do we in universities create new plants or versions of potatoes and peppers all the time by cross-pollinating? Yes, it's something we do as humans in a very natural way. Same with animals. And yes, can donkey and a horse procreate? Yes, but the mule is sterile. So there's certain things that nature just doesn't allow for reasons we're not really sure why. But there's certain things that nature does allow. Okay? What am I saying? We have to operate within what's allowed, and we have to also operate in understanding that we've been domesticating animals for tens of thousands of years. So to undo that and undo the system that we've created and their purpose that was given to them, we have to think about what that means for that species. What is more dangerous, not eating the animal or eating the animal? What ensures the species' longevity, a better livelihood? Because if I'm not eating it, do I really care what it's eating out in the environment? Do I really care if it gets diseases? Do I really care about its lifespan? Which, if none of the things that we interact to feed the animal, most of the animal's lifespans are way less. Mortality rates in birth are super high without human involvement for feeding us. So I hear what everyone's saying, but less lives are even given the chance to die in the first place. So what does it mean? We don't think about that. And if we're defending life, what about the creation of life itself and the amount of creating of life, even though the purpose may be food? So it's not as simple as just a living being. Because if we go to that argument by the standard of we don't want them to die, the only reason we're creating so many and there's so much health in their creation, even in the lower standard, which I would call the 87 octane, which is still, it's just a lower standard. It's worse for the environment. It's worse for us. It's worse for your car, being you, whatever, but it's still feeding us and it's still important. So while there are problems that we're trying to fix, we have to be careful to understand that it's not, we don't need to correct nature. We just need to enhance it and do our roles as domain, having dominion over the earth. Okay. That responsibility, not the recklessness. And if we don't eat them, they don't really serve us a purpose other than the zoo. And we don't think about that. What are we going to do with all those animals if suddenly the whole country went plant-based? What happens to them? We just let them die? No one makes any money off them. There's no way to keep them alive. There's no amount of money or organization in the world that's out there that has enough money to keep all of them alive. So suddenly, in an effort to save the animals, we just wipe them all out. And if you don't believe me, look what happened during the Obama administration when he started eliminating dairy farms. This is not a theory, this is what happens. Go to any other countries and look what happens when they start to try to control an industry out of a free market too much, or control the animals, or people have to abandon part of an industry. The animals die.
And Justin, to your point earlier, I have nothing but respect for the people that, because of conscious, reasons, don't eat meat. I have a ton of respect. I mean, human biology shows us that we need the nutrition, either from supplements or from meat. That's the way our bodies were designed, and that's how we, that's how we work. So the people that sacrifice that and sacrifice their health for their beliefs. I respect that. I'm just not willing to sacrifice my health and my children's health for a system that I think is built around nature. And I think, I do care how the animals are treated, how they're raised. It matters to me. But at the end of the day, I think it's all part of human nature. And I believe it's the healthiest. And I personally know that for a fact for myself. It's the healthiest way to eat and exist.
Yeah, I think, it's hard because one of the things that throws everyone off, guys, is that sometimes we can be plant-based and we can eat a lot of Doritos because there's no meat in it. So we take things in these grand contexts, but we don't understand that plant-based chemicals, is that a plant-based or is that man-based? And
Well,
so, that's one of the things there's these weird nuances that we're using a word being plant-based, but then there's a lot of things in there that are man-made, that are unnatural, that are from unplant things.
we're also choosing which animals get to live and which ones are expendable, such as mice, field
Yeah.
mice, moles, groundhogs. We're picking and choosing.
Yeah, I know that. And that's a whole, like, there's more animals that die in a field plowing it and stuff like
Yep.
that than any other way. And
Yep.
till this day, like, there is a balance, guys, that's needed. And part of having dominion means, and growing and protecting human population means that we have to accept that death comes for us all and the things around us. It's a matter of what is the purpose of the life. And maybe even Native Americans, spirituality, something religiously, a lot of religions agree on, no matter what, is the purpose of life. And maybe we don't take it far enough into the animals in a lot of places, or even Christians, we don't emphasize the Noah's story of the Bible and him saving the animals and the sacrifice he made to do that and what that means and the story really, really means. And by the way, he was a drunk, so he wasn't a perfect human. And so amongst all of that, God still picked an imperfect human to do something great for God's kingdom. So that's also it, guys. We all have the ability to do big things through little actions for a greater purpose. And we do not want to rob the purpose of why things were put here and their soul's purpose and why they have life and they have feelings and they have emotions, and beavers and everything do. And all, I agree. There is no way around something or things not dying to feed humans. And there's a same for a lion, same for a tiger, same for the cat that catches a mouse in your backyard. My favorite is that because we don't understand that our cats still kill things, birds in our backyard. These are very things. Our dogs still catch a animal here or there. They're not going to stop being carnivores or animals that need meat, and lives are going to have to be sacrificed to feed those animals, even in a zoo. So it's a great heroic concept in all ways, and I do commend it. I think there's a lot of humans that their bodies have been conditioned for tens of thousands of years, and that is a possibility. It's just, for me, seeing hospitals and long-term care homes for many, many years and the deterioration of life and how fast we need to get calories and proteins and sometimes sugars and minerals in us in the forms that we need us. And instead of just pumping us full of vitamins and cups and full of vitamins in our long-term care homes and our hospitals, the individuals that actually live to long life, dying naturally, not of cancer, not of whatever, are oddly usually the ones, because even the smoker that everyone's, he still lived to 101, he still died from the effects of smoking. So the ones that truly live, there's very few, but their longevity, their natural way of death, their enjoyment of life all the way to the end is so significantly different. It's why I talk about it, guys. I would not spend so much energy if I didn't know what the end looked like versus the various diets or health issues because of diets, and then trying to then react to the health issues with another type of diet because their other diet was so bad. And it's bad. And we have the choice to do it differently. We have the choice to do it in a way that saves our environment, our legacy, our future, makes the earth a better place, provides us with systems and ecosystems that we may need to take off this planet with us into the future somewhere else. Because like it or not, we have to have an ecosystem that supports itself. And that's what goes on here. Even with mass producing of crops, there's still ecosystems that support all of it. I'm sorry, Josh, I took up a lot of time today commenting back and forth.
That's okay.
I'm going to give you the mic for a little bit. I want you to talk about sort of spirituality, drive, ambition a little bit again. We started to talk about mentors and stuff last time and things like that, and I would like to talk about that a little bit, but I think they might have shifted now that you have a greater purpose. So let's dive into all of that as we finish up here.
Yeah, it's funny. I got to kind of reflect. I appreciated our conversation so much last time because it did cause me to do some inner reflection, that things I hadn't really thought about. I spoke about it a little bit earlier, that I worked for really good people who were mentors, and I was lucky to have such great mentors in my life. Prior to having, people like that, I told the story about, having this tremendous faith and, having my cross and eventually tattooing it on my arm because it was like a symbol, a symbol of, having that connection to God. And I lost that for a long time, focused on other things, I just lost it. And it wasn't that I didn't believe, it was just I was so wrapped up in my own life and my own stuff that I let it go. And, as I reflect back on the times and things that really reconnected me with God, I mean, the one that was the most impactful in my life was when my first son was born. And unfortunately, I was stationed in Texas, and his mother moved back to New Jersey. And I tell him all the time, all I did every single night was pray that God would reunite me with him. And, and eventually that did happen. And, I look back now and I see where I am and how I got there. And the most important things I needed in life, not wanted, but that I needed, I always went to God and I always prayed for them. And even though I would forget him when I would need those things and I would go back to him, it always seemed to happen. And I think about where I am now, and as I did studies and as I researched and I followed these entrepreneurs who the ones that I really liked and really respected, all found a path to God that they didn't grow up with, or they lost it. And it just had a tremendous impact on me, and it helped me find my way again. And I don't know what brought me back, but in the last year, my faith has become tremendously important to me and impactful. And I believe, I don't think that I could be where I am without it, and I certainly don't think that I could take on the mission that I'm trying to take on if I didn't have that. And it's become so important to me now to make sure that I instill this to my children, because it was never really impressed upon me as a child, but it's so important now to me that they understand how that relationship strengthens them and where it comes from. And I think, I said that I look back at not only the Bible, but especially original scriptures and original religious documents as part of the history of mankind. And when you read them with that perspective, I think it's really impactful. But I know that if I'm going to be successful in life, it's because the missions I'm taking on have genuine impact in a good way on my community, on people, on hopefully a broader spectrum But I say that to my kids all the time. I encourage them to be entrepreneurial. They're young, but I encourage that. And I always say, bring people value and do something in your heart that brings goodness to the world. Whether that's the same mission I'm on or a different mission, I felt like that's always been my mission from early on, when I knew I wanted to be a federal agent, didn't really know what that meant. I knew I wanted to protect people and be the barrier between evil and good people. And it's bizarre how that's taken me into the restaurant business, but I still believe that that's my mission, that I'm putting that barrier between poison and the people I serve. And I'm just going to continue to do that in every way I can. And that's always going to be my driving force.
Yeah, I talk a little bit about this. It's the craziest thing. And I get it. Anyone in the audience, if you go back to 2023, and if I would have said this, I would have thought I was crazy. Okay. And I know it's the craziest thing ever, but some of the things seminary taught me about like universal things, and where a lot of our personality tests or our leadership books or even Napoleon Hill, a lot of the basis all comes from this guy who was a really great leader that lived like 2,000 years ago, and the context of why leadership is the way it is in the context of the world before the Bible, as we discussed before, in the Bible now. The Bible being a vehicle to salvation, as we've discussed in some of the podcasts. What it did back then is it brought light to a world no different that it can bring light to our lives through enlightening our soul or putting the Holy Spirit into our empty jar. Why am I saying this for the audience based on the conversation that we're having? When we truly we seek God for some reason, and we seek that relationship truly, and we align it with also Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, which is a complicated relationship because it's a theological thing, and everyone is a theologian. It's not a reality thing. Okay, because God operates outside of time, outside of our understanding, and He is what I would call all present, which means He can be everywhere all at the same time. The example I would give is carbon. Every moment, everything, every energy, He's in there somehow. And I say it a lot, and I'm not saying literally God's carbon, but I'm using it as an example so everyone can take something scientific and understand that there's an energy that lives inside of each one of us. Okay. Why is that important? It also connects us to the animals and the plants around us. We share energy. If we shortcut that energy, we're not getting the proper energy we need from the things around us. And yes, we've simplified it by saying calories and vitamins and nutrition and breaking it down into ways humans can understand them for our constructs. But the reality at the end of the day is it's all a form of energy. And that's the way that God works. And if we take a moment as entrepreneurs and just silence, because one of the things as entrepreneurs that the world knows is that we have access to a lot of people. One of the things that God also knows that if He wants to give us purpose, there's no greater purpose in helping His kingdom than someone who goes into food and beverage with the right path to spread His word, usually through trials and tribulations. Why is that important? Because what I said earlier, if you look at the Bible, there's a reason the most unlikely individuals are the stories it's been written about. It takes the most unlikely individuals. Moses was broken when God's like, hey, dude, now it's your time. He's like, what? Now? Like, I finally got used to being a peasant farmer from the palace of the Pharaoh. And so right amongst his humilities, humbles himself, gets used to it, then it's also another calling. So it's that this is the journey. It's not an easy one, and there is suffering. There is pain in your business. There is losing customers or vendors or people's opinions or whatever that are going to happen. The key is steadfastness in your mission and in your journey, and the abundance will come. How do I know? Well, I'm going to allow you guys to make your own judgment on individuals that have been on the podcast and see the individuals, their livelihood, their community, their spirit, the way they talk about their businesses when they anchor it greater purpose and their attitude versus those that don't have the greater purpose yet. Creating jobs is a great purpose. There's nothing against what I'm talking about. Serving good food to your community, great purpose. Breaking bread, great purpose. Not taking anything away from it. But if you want to live at an elite level in the food game and be the best of the best, regardless of what part of the industry you're in, from fast food all the way to fine dining or catering or food service, what makes you an elite outside of just being good food and good service? If you want to be the best of the best, you have to source the best ingredients. The best. And best isn't only flavor or how much marbling or whatever. It's also the best of the best in how it's raised and sourced. And the best of the best also comes from the energy it's raised in. So who are these farmers that are raising it? Who are they? Do you know them? Why aren't you friends with them? Because I guarantee you they're more important in your life than the guy you're playing golf with. But you'll spend every weekend playing golf with your golf buddies, but yet you don't spend any time with the farmer who has more impact on your business than the golf buddy. Maybe the golf buddy is an entrepreneur and a peer and someone that helps you in that way. Okay, given. But I'm just using extremes and being a little pushy and being a little agitating, like a bee in your bonnet over this in the audience, because I'm trying to get you to think about it. Do I think you shouldn't play golf or have free time or grow from those? That's up to you. But what I am saying is I think it's interesting as entrepreneurs how we seek to hang out with individuals or friends that literally, or people outside of an industry. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't, but that time should be really spent with the individuals that have impact on our families and our businesses also. So should we have friends, and are they good friends? I'm not saying ditch your friends, but what I am saying is it's an interesting perspective when we look at who truly has impact on our lives, our businesses, our employees, and where we're spending our time, and what would happen if we spent more time with those impact and influencers on our business, and therefore in return spend more time with those who have impact and influence from us or by us in our businesses or outside of us. It's just worth looking at, guys, and it's worth thinking about because it is important. And I'm not telling you how to run your restaurants or your businesses or anything like that, but I do think that there's an elite level of doing things and there's an American way of doing things. And if we want to be America again, one of the things that no matter what happens, we need to have secure food sources. And no matter what happens, it needs to be diverse in animals. And it needs to be diverse in sort of making sure that we keep the natural populations of animals also in good health in case we need to turn to them for food. What do I mean? Elk farmers in Wyoming, deer populations controlled in Pennsylvania through things like Trouts Unlimited or Deer Hunters Unlimited. I can't remember what the one is for deer, but either way, those type of things. Why do they matter? Because why do we need to keep the population checked? Yeah, disease, animals, dogs getting eaten, all matter. But what matters more? We keep them in check so there's healthy populations there. So guess what? If we ever need to turn to them as a source for food, they're still there. Because if we eliminated them or we didn't care about them or we just hunted them until they were extinct or didn't allow the wolves to do their natural thing or the bears to do their natural thing, but also understand as humans, we need to keep it in check. We need to sometimes pollinate and we need to sometimes trim. No different than a tree. That is important. And when we look at it from a government and political perspective and we want to make change in a government way, this is the most important part. How do I feed a military if I need to in times of war? And if we were squeezed, how do I feed a population?
Justin, that's such a great point because sometimes I'm fighting with people over things that they clearly don't understand. We were talking about trees earlier, and where I live, the whole mountain had been clear cut back in the day because Thomas Edison was using the wood to fire up some of his machinery. So everything grew back at one size. So a forestry plan came in to, try and bring it back to what they think would be its most natural resource, because when you create a canopy like that, then you don't have any low-lying vegetation. You're killing off some of the smaller animals. But people were made to believe that, this was a logging operation, and they were destroying nature. And, sometimes men create issues that have to be fixed by men and or man in general. And part of that is, taking these natural, beautiful hundreds, thousands of acres of natural resource and protecting the animals that maybe we created a problem for so that they can, have a great population. What a great way to preserve natural resources and have a food backup, or even providing food for local communities. But that's what people have to understand, is that sometimes there's a reason behind these forestry plans, and it's fixing the wrongs of man from the past.
Yeah, I agree with this a lot. And I actually find politics so interesting in this way, especially, I mean, we are the God country right now. I want everyone to know that. Like, it's in our Constitution. We have a growing population. God's empowering us. What we do with it is up to us. Okay. We can live up to it or we can't, because it does matter, especially if anyone who travels the world, it does matter. Those words in our Constitution, those core values, those morals, those ethics. Okay.
And
Go ahead.
Justin, just to your point, and I hear people argue this all the time, and just because one of the main reasons it was not talked about more in our founding documents is because it was so prevalent in the state founding documents and the state rules and regulations, which was so important of our founding fathers to protect states' rights. And in every state that existed at the time, religion was such an important part of their founding documents and their rules and regulations. And I think that's important to point out for people that don't know that.
Yeah, and we should think about Benjamin Franklin and Quakers and Pennsylvania and being extremely passive. And so in the way that the Quakers did in Pennsylvania, being such a strong force back then, think about it, guys. Everyone had different views, and you're 100% right. There were Southern Baptists and things like this that more prevalent, what I would call, maybe they weren't called Southern Baptists then, but that type of thing. And in the North, we had other things. From Massachusetts, we know that a lot of Massachusetts was just started solely for religious freedom. And, I agree with you. I love that commentary, because it is important to know it's no different than what marijuana is right now. It's being handled at a state level, so the government has been less hands off, even though technically it's illegal on a federal level. Josh, anything you want to end with? I'm sorry, I was fired up today. Sorry about that.
No, I just, I thank you again for having this outlet for us to have these important conversations and talk about these issues. I mean, not only from just a food aspect, but entrepreneurism in general, because I think that's how we get back to making America what it was meant to be, is promoting, small business into into medium business into big business, but supporting American greatness through entrepreneurism and capitalism, with always the mindset of making it the best place we can for the citizens here in this country. And, the food system is a great example of so many things that were meant to make it better have been corrupted and manipulated and just gone the wrong way. And I think, part of taking this all back is educating people. And, you alluded to it earlier, is that people with the same mindset, the same mission, banding together to support each other, to help each other, to grow each other, and to work together. I think that's how we get there. And it's been a blessing to be able to go on here and voice this. And, social media people have reached out to me on the same mission, and I'm bringing their products into my restaurant to help support them. They're putting the word out on who I am to support me. And, if we all do that for each other, that's how you grow the movement. And that's how you make the change that is needed. So thank you, Justin,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you brought some really great introspection into my life, and it's going to help me go where I need to go. And this discussion was much needed for me, but I hope it helps others.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you're doing. It's so important, and it's going to be really impactful.
Yeah, I had and I'm going to ask this. I had 3 questions come in. I'm going to sort of ad lib them, guys, because you guys all kind of asked the same question. This is my last one for you, Josh. The
Yeah.
health change you went through by changing your diet was significant enough for you to risk it all and start a business around it. Let's anchor it for the audience. I think there's a lot of questions like it must have been, I don't know, like a Joshua Tree moment for you to go to such an extreme. I don't think it was quite lightning striking, but I do think there was such a vast improvement in your life that there was significant. I want to dive into greater detail on this if you don't mind real
Sure.
quick.
Yeah.
Because
No, absolutely.
and your journey, we briefly discussed it, the trip to Italy, but I think if we could really take some time to lay out the details in that transition and what I would call your test was like during that time for you to be able to have a business as your testimony, I really want to focus on that.
Yeah. So, just living my life, a big part of my job was traveling and, doing a lot of that. You're eating at restaurants all the time. And I was eating, I would say at home, I ate what I thought was healthy. I shopped at the farmer's market. I tried to do all the right things, but I was eating more out than I was in, and was typical American. I was overweight. I was high blood pressure, all those things. And I go to the doctor randomly, and he's like, "You got to go to the hospital right now. Your heart's out of rhythm. You're an AFib." Didn't really know anything about it, but he made it sound like it was this big emergency, and it freaked me out. And went to a couple cardiologists. They hyper medicated me. Went through this whole thing, and basically, I learned through that thing that the one medication that was just for heartburn is basically part of what caused it. 2, some of the medications that the cardiologist gave me almost made me black out and pass out, and I thought I was having a heart attack. And it made me do research that I should have done in the beginning. I should have been my own advocate, but I wasn't. I trusted these institutions and these ideas. And, I was frustrated. I went off all the medication. I was scared because I didn't trust the medical industry anymore, but I knew I needed to fix myself. And one of the things I thought I had tried everything, and I said, I'm going to try this carnivore thing. And it was life changing. I dropped 50 pounds. My blood pressure quickly went to normal. My triglycerides dropped dramatically. Everything just went in the right direction. I felt fantastic. Like I hadn't felt in years. I had more energy. I was more present when I was home. And then I went down the rabbit hole. And one of the things I think I mentioned last time, but I think is a funny part of it, is that when you do that, when you go down that rabbit hole and you learn the things you learn about health and about food and about where the system is failing, and I personally experienced it, I wanted to share it with everybody. And, there's all kinds of funny memes about people on keto and people, that are vegans, and they're always trying to push their philosophy on you. And I get it. I got it, because I wanted to tell everybody. I wanted everybody, all my friends and all my family, to be healthy like I felt like I was now. And what I learned through that experience was you can't force people into something they're not ready for, regardless of how good you think it is for them. So I loved going out. I loved the social aspect of going out. I love hospitality. I always did, even though I wasn't in that business. I loved it. And I said, what better way to not push something on people, but to still help them, was to provide a place where they can go with their family, have that family dinner together or with friends. And even if they don't realize they're eating healthy food because it's just delicious food and they love it, but that you're giving them quality, good things, and you're helping, to be part of their health. And, it was just something that I felt super important. I wanted to change other people's lives the way my life was changed by some of the people that, I'd followed online, that I trusted. But I didn't want to push it in their face, because that just doesn't work. So I always had an entrepreneur spirit, and I was like, listen, I don't know anything about this business. I know I have a friend who's a amazing chef who has the same mindset, And I'm like, I want to try and convince him to come do this with me. And, my partner, one of my best friends since we were kids, he was all in and into starting something to serve our community. We both love this town that we grew up in. And I just said, I'm going to give it a shot. And I remember the first story I heard of somebody calling me and telling me that two guys at the gym were talking about how they just ate there and how great they felt afterwards. And they couldn't believe how good they felt. And I was like, that was it. That was what I was hoping for, is that people would not realize it until they felt it. And they were like, wow, it does make a difference. It does matter. I feel like not only have I been able to do that for people in my community, but people in the whole area surrounding. I mean, I have people that come drive an hour and a half from the Bronx to have Sunday dinner with us because they trust us, because they know that they can come, sit down, have a family dinner, and it's good for them. And that means something. And I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I knew that I live in a small town. I know it wasn't the venue for a super successful restaurant, but if I didn't serve my community first, I don't think I could have done it. And I'm so humbled by the response, by the loyalty of my customers, by everything. And I know that comes down to when you're trying to do the right thing and you put the work in, that, this is the outcome, and I'm blessed.
Talk to me about your output. Your energy's changed. We talked about energy transference. So you're getting a much more effective energy. You feel better. Talk to me about your personal output, energy levels during a day, ability to accomplish things. But it not only teed you up for a business, but I think it teed you up to have the endurance necessary to be an entrepreneur in some ways. Let's talk about that. The difference in energy levels, what your day looks like comparatively.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was going to be hard. I knew there was going to be sacrifice, especially, because I do have a job, and I have to be able to do both and do both effectively. And in the beginning, I don't think I had ever worked 16 hours a day for 3 months straight without a day off. But that's what it took. And it's funny, and I said this about, failure last time, and I needed retrospect to realize that I did fail at businesses before that I started when I was young, to know that failure was part of shaping me. Just like I would hear people say about, you got to put in the work, you got to put in the grind. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't really do that. And I look back and I'm like, yeah, 16-hour days for 3 months straight. That's a grind. But to me, it wasn't even work. It was like I was on my mission. I felt like, even though I knew it was a lot of time and I wasn't home as much as I was used to being, it didn't feel like work. But if I hadn't changed my health and my life, there's no way I could have done it. I mean, I'm up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I do my workout. I usually open my computer first. I do my vitamins, drink some coffee. I do emails. I try and go through all my work emails that maybe I missed in the evening. Then I do my workout. I get ready, with the family. Some days I jump in the car, I go to my office, I try and pound out as much work as I can there, and then I come back and go to the restaurant, or I go to the restaurant first. But there's always, got to do my work, and then I gotta just check on things at the restaurant. And the reason I'm not there 16 hours a day now, and I'm there every day, but for smaller periods of time, is because God blessed me with an amazing team, and I can't take credit for it, because in the beginning, I'll take credit for my chef Ethan, who's one of my managers too, because I took a long time convincing him. But everybody else was brought to me. They came walking in that door looking for a job, and I could not be more blessed with a better team of people that work so hard, that believe in the mission. And it's the only way I got some of my time back. And now the mission is growing that and finding other places. But the energy levels, I don't sit down anymore. I mean, if I'm sitting down, it's in front of a computer doing work. Maybe I get to watch a show with my wife as we're falling asleep in bed, but I just go all day long. And I remember times, even when I was younger, in what I thought was good shape, but in the middle of the day being tired, being like, man, I could use a nap. I can't even fathom that now.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
It's not even
Yeah.
a thought in my head. but there's no way I could have done this a few years ago in the condition I was in. Never.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize this. God not only prepared Joshua through his suffering, he had to suffer first before he could get a better diet, better lifestyle. Let's call it a lifestyle because it is. It's not just something we do.
Right.
And then not only that, through that prepared him, equipped him, armed him for what the next part of the journey was. He did it all in one thing, the transformation, guys, just so we're aware. It's gradual what happened. It may look abrupt to the outside world, but it's seeped into the cracks of Joshua. And I'm going to anchor this just because, one of my favorite things in leadership class in seminary school was learning about Joshua, who was actually one of the most courageous and successful, bravest, whatever you want to look, warriors of the Bible, Old Testament. He was the second person to take over leading the Israelites after Moses, just so everyone knows. When they were freed from Egypt, I can't remember exactly. I think he was in his late teens, early 20s. So he had a transformation and a freeing in life in two different perspectives, a transitioning that gave him a different perspective. And he wasn't Moses. He was actually an Israelite. That transition. Why is it important? I'm going to anchor this for you, Joshua, just for you. And I feel like the audience should understand this as well. One of the things that I think, and I've done some research, but I'm just going to pick these in particular, the characteristics of Joshua. Joshua was an excellent military strategist. Okay. While you said that you weren't in the military, you did go into a government. You are strategy based. Your mind does work through planning and, in this case, now aligning your plan with God's plan over the last year. I think that that's just something to be thought of. And I think when in the Bible, when we're talking about excellent military strategists, we're talking about for God's kingdom. Okay. Joshua was obedient. He could also hear the voice of God in silence. And what does that mean? I think people think it's like this loud, I'm God. No, it's this little voice that sort of comes into the cracks and moves you in a direction that's greater, that takes an ordinary, imperfect human, puts something inside of them through the Holy Spirit, and then that Spirit starts getting into all the cracks until it dumps out the jar, and you put it first, and then you fill the jar. Okay, I know that's hard for everyone to understand, but that's what we're talking about here, ear for God. And Joshua trusted God, absolutely. He was faithful. He was so loyal to God that there was almost a jealousy there, and the way it was described. So I would say that there's a lot there in your name. I would say like these things matter. And I would say the obedience, the discipline you have towards your goal, Joshua, the things that you're doing, I think is very important. And we don't go through transformations without greater purpose and calling. It's life stacks our skills. Then what generally happens is we're sort of flushed clean. We're rebuilt with the skills we need for the future and the skills that we need to gain right now for the future, if that makes sense to everyone. And that's what happened to Joshua. He had all the skills, then he went through this thing that changed his life. That very transformation became the greater purpose for his future.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's funny as you're saying all this, I'm remembering one of my earliest memories as a child was my mom reading me Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, reading me the story. And it's funny, I know I mentioned this last time, but the energy, it wasn't just physical energy, it was mental clarity. And I think one of the biggest things that God did for me is, I booked this father-son boot camp because I know I had the experience of doing hard things in the government and training with the military, and it impacted me. It taught me that I could push myself and I could do hard things. And I wanted my son to be able to experience a little bit of that. And we went out to California for this father-son boot camp, and it was very rigorous. But before that, I decided I was going to do dry January And, because I knew it was going to be hard, I wanted to be in the right frame. And I came back and I knew the next step was opening the business, and I had to get prepared, and it was going to be a lot of work. And I have not had a drink since. And, I think if I look back in my life, and any of the things that I thought were failures or bad decisions were always based on alcohol. And I never intended to quit. That was never my intention, but I feel like that was definitely part of God saying, if I'm going to prepare you for this, this has to be out of your life, because I didn't intend it, and I wasn't planning on it, and I didn't want it. I just didn't want it in my life anymore, and I didn't know why. But haven't had one since. It's been, well over a year now. But I look back and I can say, there were a few things where God was sending me messages, that, and I think it was the first month of being open, and I was sitting at my back table doing work, like I always do. And there was this table full of women. I don't know, they probably were in their 60s. And I just happened to look up, and they were saying grace. And I remember getting the chills, and I walked over and I told them, I'm like, I just want to thank you guys. I'm like, this is the first time I've seen anybody do this in my restaurant. And I'm like, I take that as a blessing. I'm like, I just wanted to say thank you. And they were so appreciative of that. But, there are those signs that just give you that mental push, and that acknowledgement that you're on the right path. So, and this is one of them. Having these conversations is definitely going to be one of them for me.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this, and I love everyone. And again, I'm not in your business. I know I'm going to upset people or whatever, but I think it's important for everyone for this. Okay. What is it that we're doing? And if we are Christian, and it's love thy neighbor, love God, love thy neighbor, as we talked about, why is it the neighbor? He's the closest one to us. Because if we can love them, we can love anyone. Okay. We know them better. What does it mean? We need to have intimate relationships and love people anyway. Okay, that's important. I think we talked about that on the last one. But what it also means is that in leadership, that as leaders, our companies suffer from the same sins that we suffer from as leaders. Okay? And maybe we're living up to a better standard, or we're doing things better, or we are being obedient. But if there's something that's not being accomplished, or we aren't winning, there needs to be a tweak in our behavior as the leaders. Okay? What do I mean? Sometimes we're fighting the war in front of us without fighting the war behind us. So we need to go fix something. What does that mean? In this case, this means we need to fix our supply chain in order to fix our relationships, to have better relationships with our customers. How do we keep them from just needing to create new things all the time, which we should? We should always be creative in our businesses, but we also stand for something. There's some core values and morals and ethics. Why is that important? Well, because without them, there really isn't a culture to build a business on, as we've been discussing throughout this podcast. Without strong things that you actually feel, that you actually live, that are good, the longevity of the business, the output of the employees, the energy that we're talking about is much different. Why does Google feed their employees good food, superfoods, have access to healthy foods? Why? Because their output's better. It's cheaper this way. Spending the money on $25, $30 for a lunch on an employee that their output goes up 20%, worth it. Oh, you want to take the food home too, so your family eats healthy and you eat healthy at home, so all of you are mentally and physically healthier? Check, please. Better employee mentally and physically also. Just saying. My last point is going to be this on this topic. One of the things that happened to Joshua when he was leading the Israelites is he lost a battle that he's sure he was going to win to make Israel at that time, united and truly fulfill what God promised him. But the problem is even though Joshua was living a certain way, he had not yet learned to go back to the Israelites who were now living in sin, false idols, many other things, to go back to them and be able to lead them in a way that where when Israel was established, it mattered. The timing was wrong. Because why Joshua had to go first lead his people out of sin the biggest battle of them all before the reality one that's just a human construct of territory was achieved. He had to go fight the one that was spiritual first before he could win the one that was reality. Similar story here, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So, thank you, Joshua, for being on the show. I appreciate it. Will you tell everyone where they can find you online, where they can shop with you, how they can find you?
Yeah, our website is burgerandbutcher.com. You can find all our social media via that, but if you just search up Burger and Butcher, you'll find us on pretty much all the social media. We're primarily on Instagram, but you'll find us everywhere. And we're based in northern New Jersey, a little town, my hometown, Sparta. But hopefully, we're working slowly and methodically to bring Burger and Butcher to the rest of the country. But it's not going to happen quickly, but we're trying to do it the right way. And I look forward to, we have so many messages from people reaching out, asking us to come to their city, and we're working on it. We're getting there. But Justin, really appreciate this outlet. I appreciate the conversation. You're good at what you do, man. You get people thinking. I certainly, you got me thinking. You got me, reflecting on why I'm here, what I'm doing, and it's a great thing you do, and I think you're going to help a lot of people. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your time. I know we went way over, so it means a lot, Josh, that you came on the show and have come on again so quickly to talk about this stuff. It's really important to me, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Everyone in the audience, I'm not going to take long to get us out of here. Like, follow, subscribe to Josh's stuff, follow him on Instagram, seriously listen to what's going on there, hear his voice. And then I'm going to say this in as little words as possible. When we feel love, do we feel it through someone's words or through someone's energy and actions? So when we are looking for God's voice, why are we looking for it through sound when everything else God has created communicates it through energy and actions? Why do we need it to be a voice? A voice is a human thing. And why we say the voice of God, we have to be aware the word actually means communication. And so how does God communicate? Why am I attaching voice of God to Joshua? The energy that communicates us, that pushes us, that we all know exists, that we cannot deny, is God. We know it. We know that our wife is mad at us by her energy, not necessarily by her words. Her words reinforce it. We as humans reinforce things through our words. Energy is the first key. It's where our questions come from. It's how we identify patterns. So I want everyone to just realize if we want to think about it or we think God's not talking to us because we don't hear him, literally, it's because we're not focusing on the way the world communicates. What's the actual voice of the world around us? We don't understand our dog. It doesn't say, feed me, but we feed it anyway. Think about it, guys. Thank you, everyone. I love you guys. We're out.